So today we're going to be picking up with solving systems again. So these two problems that you see up here, you can currently solve both of these two systems. So to start with, leading us into our new material, we're actually going to start by taking a look at how these two would be solved. So go ahead and solve these two on your own paper. Then we'll go through them, and then we'll see some easier methods that can be used when they're set up in certain ways. And so to check in, make sure you're on the right track working through this one. For that first one, remember we're using substitution method. It's called substitution, remember, because we're going to actually substitute in the value of what y equals into y in the other equation. And so there's your first step. Make sure you have that first step down correctly, and if you're feeling a little stuck, well, this should get you off on the right foot. All right, so now we need to distribute in. Remember that when you're distributing here, you're actually multiplying in a -2. So one of the toughest things to remember is that this is going to be a -2 because we're doing -2 times a +1 there. Once we've done that, now we can go ahead and combine the like terms on the left-hand side. So 5x minus 4x, that's just 1x, which is x. And remember, anytime it's 1x, just write it as x. It makes your life easier. It makes the equation look less complex, and so it makes your life easier. And finally, to get x by itself, we got to get rid of the -2. So add 2 to both sides, and you get x equals 3. Are we done at this point? No. Because once you find x, you still have to find the y value. And we find that by plugging it in. We are going to take the value of x equals 3, and we're going to plug it in for x into one of the original equations. Now, we can plug it into either one of the originals, but one of them definitely looks easier. I'm going to plug it into the first one because I want to know what y equals, and the first equation is set up as y equals. So it's going to tell me what y equals. So I plug the x equals 3 in for x. Go ahead and do that math. And you should get y equals 7. Once you find the y value, remember we write our answer as a coordinate pair. So x comes first, then y, so it's 3, 7. Now for the second problem, it's in a little bit of a different category because all the previous ones where we've used substitution method, I gave you one of the equations already solved to be x equals or y equals. In this case, it's not. And so if I'm going to solve this using substitution, the very first thing I have to do is figure out what x or y equals. I need to make one of the equations just be x or y equals. In this case, the easiest way to do it is to get x equals in the first equation, because you notice it's just a plain old x there. So I'm going to start by rearranging the first equation by subtracting 4y from both sides. The second equation, I don't need to change that. I only need one of them to be x equals. So I subtracted 4y from both sides on the first equation. That gave me x equals -4y minus 5. A little side note here, if you wrote it as x equals -5 minus 4y, that's the same thing, also perfectly fine. Now you can go ahead and use substitution method like you normally would on this problem. So go ahead and solve it from there. Now, we just went through solving that second system by using the substitution method, but there's actually another method that we can use to solve it. And this other method actually sets up beautifully for this particular system of equations. We're going to be taking a look at what's called the elimination method. The elimination method starts by adding the two equations together. Yes, we are allowed to actually add equations as a whole. When you do that, it's just everything that's like each other has to be lined up before we can actually add them. So if I'm going to add these together then, what's x plus negative x? 0. So that becomes a 0 plus, okay, so now I got 4y plus a negative 3y. What's 4y plus negative 3y? It's 1y, yeah. So it's great. And then negative 5 plus 2 is negative 3. Now, I've written this out a longer way than I would expect you to write it. And I don't want you to actually necessarily have to write all this stuff out for this addition, because what's a shorter way, for instance, to write 0 plus 1y? Just 1y, because 0 plus anything is just itself, so I actually don't really need to write the 0 in there. So we can go ahead and take that out. Then, what about 1y? Yeah, that's just y, right? So we end up with just y equals negative 3. So when we added these together, all we ended up with was y equals negative 3. That is so much simpler. So now that I found y, how do I find x? Same way as before. Plug it in. And again, you can plug into either one of the original equations. I think the first one maybe looks a little bit simpler here, so I'm going to plug it into that. So x plus 4 times the negative 3 equals negative 5, and then we're going to work that out. And here you can see all the pieces in there where we plugged that back in. We find that x ends up equaling 7. We have to do a little bit more solving on this one for that second variable than maybe we did with substitution method. But compare the amount of work we just did for this problem with when we solved it for substitution method. This is a lot less writing. So while both methods technically can work for any system, you want to choose the best method for that particular system because it's going to make your life easier. So how do you know which one to use? Use substitution method anytime you start with either x equals or y equals in at least one of the equations. If you do not have x equals or y equals, such as this problem, that's what tells you to use elimination method. All right, so having seen how to do elimination method, I'd like you to now practice that method solving these two problems. So write down and solve both of these problems now on your own paper. All right, so with this one now, we have 0 equals 8y, and this is the point where a lot of people start feeling uncomfortable because they start saying what went wrong. But 0, remember, is a number. And so to get y by itself, I still can go ahead and divide both sides by the 8. And 0 divided by 8 is 0. 0 is a number, so y can equal 0 here. So your final answer is -3, 0.